Before we get into any of the actual serious questions that we have lined up here on Hockey Inside Out, I just want to ask, just to clarify something. Let's say the Canadiens lost that first round series to the Leafs. The Olympic Stadium, which sometimes lights up, that's not lighting up blue and white like the Leafs colors, right? Not at all, right?
Probably not.
Not like the CN Tower like we're seeing in Toronto. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure of that. I thought I was being crazy, but I just wanted to make sure of that. Welcome to Hockey Inside Out. Back at it with another edition of Hockey Inside Out. Julian McKenzie here, and you know who else is with me. Stu Cowan from the Montreal Gazette is here. Jessica Rusnak from CBC Daybreak Montreal is here. Rick Green, former NHL defenseman, Stanley Cup champion, all that. We're all here. And so are the Montreal Canadiens in the Stanley Cup semifinals, just as we all planned it. Not only that, they have not lost since Game 4 of the first round series they had against the Toronto Maple Leafs. We all know how that ended, and we all know how it ended against the Winnipeg Jets, where they brought out the brooms. Probably should have brought out a broom myself, I guess, or whatever, but they brought out the brooms against the Winnipeg Jets. Just to get started here, what do you think is behind this remarkable turnaround for the Montreal Canadiens, where, again, they were down 3-1 against the Leafs and there was no hope, but they've seemingly turned it around much for the better?
Well, during Game 4 against the Jets, when the Habs took a 1-0 lead, I sent out a tweet saying, what happened to the guys who were skating around wearing the Habs jerseys in the first 4 games against Toronto, and where did Marc Bergevin bury the bodies? Because this is like a totally different team. And then my buddy Luc Jolinoff from RDS responded saying, oh, it's easy. He said Patrick Roy and Mario Tremblay kissed and made up, so the Forum Ghosts came back to the Bell Center. So that makes as much sense as anything else at this point, I think. It's so hard to figure out why this team has been able to turn it around. That Nick Suzuki overtime goal in Game 5 and Kotkaniemi in Game 6. I think they just fed off of that. And I think the momentum and the confidence has continued to grow. Carey Price has continued to play well. One win has led to another. And I spoke with Mario Tremblay this week just to get his thoughts about the ghost thing. He says, hey, who knows? Maybe that's it. But he made a good point, too. He said the hardest series to win in the playoffs is the first series. He said it's just difficult. Teams are pumped. I mean, he says once you win that first series, teams can get in a roll. And he was on teams with the Canadiens. He won 4 Stanley Cups. If that was the case, you get through that first series and you get on a roll. And that seems to be exactly what's happened with the Canadiens, whether there's ghosts involved or not.
The curse of St. Patrick is now over, and the Canadiens are able to play with some success. But I think it has a lot to do with the momentum and the confidence that I think as soon as you get that and you're able to add another victory. Now at that point, it was 7 wins in a row, the longest winning streak they've had all season long. And it comes in the playoffs. I don't think many people thought they would be. They just feel really good about themselves. And they're getting a lot of contribution from a lot of different players and the players that they need to make the difference here in the playoffs. Now, the challenge will be to not let any of that momentum go, because we've seen a few times in this playoff so far when a team sweeps another one, the next series they have a little bit of trouble getting going. Look at the Winnipeg Jets there. So that's going to be the challenge with the Canadiens right now, is not to let any of that momentum go away.
What a change in the mindset and the desperation that the players showed, which was like incredible turnaround, because everybody seemed to be getting on board. And I don't know whether they were motivated to the point where they didn't want to hear any more criticism, but they looked like, a whole different group of guys that were really, really hungry to not lose. And let's face it, in the playoffs, it's all about certain players you have expectations for, but there's other ones that will elevate their play in playoffs. I mean, you look at Lehkonen, you look at Kotkaniemi, these kind of guys have shown their real character and have been able to contribute, and it makes a difference in the overall group and the performance of the team. If they continue to get these type of players showing up, aside from Carey Price doing what he does, they can continue to ride this wave. And it's really nice to see that they were down so low and they were able to scratch their way back to respectability and in their play and the system that they're working right now. And it's they're getting the results.
It just shows you how quickly things can change in the playoffs, though. As I mentioned, Nick Suzuki doesn't score that overtime goal, or Kotkaniemi in an overtime period, the Canes were shot 13-2. We're probably all sitting here now talking about what Dominic Ducharme is going to get fired, whether Marc Bergevin will be back as GM, all that kind of stuff. And things change quickly. And you go back to '93 when the Habs won the Cup. They were down 2-0 to Quebec after losing the first 2 games to Nordiques in Quebec. They came back to won Game 3 in overtime at the Forum, and then from there went on that roll. If they lose that Game 3 in overtime to the Nordiques, you figure they're going to lose in the first round. Very rare a team comes back from down 3-0. But things change quick in the playoffs. You got to take advantage of the opportunities that you have, and the Canadiens have, and they fed off it. And who would have thought? 4-game sweep of the Winnipeg Jets. It's quite remarkable.
I actually want to build on that. Which series result are you more surprised over? The fact that the Canadiens came back from 3-1 over the Leafs, or the fact that they just completely done and dusted the Winnipeg Jets 4-0?
Well, I thought they'd win. I picked them to beat the Jets in 6 games. I thought the way that they played in Game 7 against Toronto and the way coming off all that momentum, I thought they would beat the Jets. I didn't think they'd win in 4 games, but you probably remember on the show, Jess was the only one who thought the Canadiens would win the first series. I thought the Leafs would win in 5, and if Nick Suzuki doesn't score in overtime, maybe I'm right.
To me, it's the comeback against Toronto, especially after they played in that Game 4 against Toronto. They looked like they were a team that were done, that they were just going to come back, and that was about, like, they were just going to play that final game and then pack their bags and go home. But they came back with so much energy and urgency in their play that they didn't show before. And then that turnaround, to me, is the biggest surprise.
And I think it's a carryover from knocking off Toronto. They just started to build it. We talk about momentum. They built some confidence. They had almost a degree of cockiness that they were not going to lose. And when these things type of things come into your game play, anything can happen. I mean, you have to look also at. I always look at some of the bounces. Where the pucks go to favorable places on rebounds. Do they go directly to a stick, or do they go off by 2 feet where the guy can't knock it into the open net? Crossbars, posts. I mean, you can think back to the number of times that instead of the puck going from the post and in the net, it's going off and outside of the net. And right now they have a lot of good things happening, a lot of good bounces, and who knows where this is going to go if it continues to. It's hard. I remember back in '86, you just knew you were going to get a favorable bounce, and right now they're getting good bounces along with good play. Who knows where it's going to go?
Well, on game days, I've been writing early columns for the paper, and the day of Game 5, I wrote one looking ahead to next season, because the way they played in Game 4, there was absolutely nothing to lead you to believe they would come back. They basically rolled over in Game 4, and it looked like they were just going to go out with a whimper, and whatever happened, they came back in Game 5, and we know the rest. But heading into that Game 5, there was absolutely no reason to believe the Canadiens were going to put up a fight, or the fight that they have since then.
Yeah, and to be fair to the Canadiens as well, a lot of people didn't even think they had a chance going into that series. Not just our opinions on the panel as well. You can go back to what's been said on ESPN and all these other different outlets. Tyler Toffoli's right. There are a lot of people who kind of, not to say it's a one against the world thing, but yeah, it kind of does feel like that. And the Canadiens, I think, have also embraced that as well. Philip Deneau keeps referencing the fact that in the middle of that Leaf series, he took that moment to look at himself in the mirror and say he's the man. And I think a lot of those guys have kind of followed his lead, and guys like Corey Perry as well, and have just kind of pushed themselves to this point. And you guys are all right when you guys say that the Leafs result is more surprising, but I'm still almost as shocked about the Jets just not showing up. Even the 1-0 result in Game 2 of that series, I never felt for a second the Jets took control of that game at all. It was almost as if after the Mark Scheifele suspension, which we don't have listed here. I don't know if anyone is going to want to go in on Mark Scheifele's post-season comments after that. I mean, sure, go ahead. The floor will be yours at some point. But I'm just surprised at how the Jets just didn't show up in Games 2, 3, and 4. Think about it. If it wasn't for Logan Stanley in Game 4 at the Bell Center, the Jets lose in regulation. But Logan Stanley's 2-goal game keeps the Jets alive, and Connor Hellebuck as well. I think everyone has every right to be surprised and in awe of what the Canadiens did against the Leafs, and people in Toronto obviously are never going to forget about it. But in Winnipeg, I'm almost as shocked because of how much I've rated this team in the past and how they just didn't show up against the Canadiens at all. The Canadiens did everything they could to take them out of that series, but Winnipeg had almost no fight.
Yeah,
Well, Julian, you should send Mark Scheifele. Sorry, goes to.
The noted sniper Logan Stanley who had 1 goal all season, and the second goal, that was the first week goal the Carey Price was let in, but to come back, it's as we said, who would have thunk it, right?
Julian, you should send Mark Scheifele a message because he called out the media saying that everyone doubted them, and look, they made the playoffs, so you can say, hey, I was very high on you.
Hey.
One word.
Go ahead.
Pathetic.
Go ahead.
Pathetic. That's pathetic that he still thinks he's the victim while Jake Evans was one carried off on the stretcher and still hasn't played and is still recovering from his concussion, and we're not sure if he's going to be ready to play in the next round. So Mark Scheifele, just pathetic.
I didn't think he was that type of character, but obviously, judging by what he said, he surely lost a lot of respect.
And especially that there was so much time for him to gather his thoughts and think about what he wanted to say. It wasn't after the game and the emotions are running high, you might say afterwards, maybe that wasn't the best approach. Like, he had days to think about it, and he was still as fired up as he was when the hit first happened. So yeah, definitely classless on Mark Scheifele's part.
Blaming
the Department of
Safety. If George Peros says it was a predatory hit, George Peros said it was a predatory hit, that just shows you how vicious that hit was. Because George Peros, as we know, is infamous for the $5,000 fine for guys trying to kill each other.
I just want to add this. I think Mark Scheifele's comments were just a little off to me, but I was also just as taken aback by another narrative going around that because of everyone disagreeing with what he had to say, that's a reason why NHL players should just become robots when they speak to the media. Like all of a sudden, if you say something wrong, like, oh, whoa, that's why I'm just going to not say anything. I think that narrative is also just as bonkers. Also, go ahead. Sorry.
The anger get the most of them. And Rick, everybody who's ever played hockey, there's a point where you're so angry that you've probably done something stupid. And he got angry and he did something stupid. Just apologize and move on. But he's not man enough to do that.
I'll just add, at the beginning of the season, I picked Winnipeg as one of my 4 playoff teams. I said Toronto, Montreal, Winnipeg, and Calgary. So yeah, you know what? Maybe I should send Mark Scheifele a message because I'm like, hey, I believed in you guys, and you guys just didn't show up in second round. Anyway, question number 2. What has impressed you the most with the Canadiens' overall play pretty much since they turned it around for themselves in that series against the Leafs?
Their ability to get their offense going and score goals. That for the longest time, it was always the same sort of narrative that, goals are hard to come by. They're even harder during the playoffs. And that was kind of the excuse why they weren't able to find the back of the net, especially early on in that Toronto Maple Leafs series. And then after that, when that Game 5 happened, that we keep talking about the turning point of it, they haven't had any trouble scoring goals. And that, to me, has been, the most impressive thing is that for a team who struggled to score goals and always had every excuse as to why they couldn't score goals, well, they're doing something right and figuring out what you need to do in order to score more goals.
And for me, it's looking at the details of the game. Again, I come back to the defense on their ability to box out opposition, get to loose pucks. I go with the forwards, the Montreal Canadiens forwards, as having a real good disciplined system to allow their third man high. And I look back at a number of the games. The neutral zone got pretty crowded with 3 guys lined up at the blue line and making it really tough for the opposition to penetrate and get anything going under control. They forced a lot of dump-ins, which is what they wanted to do, and were really effective at it. So there's a lot of trust in their system right now. There's a lot of belief in what each and every guy that's on the ice responsibility is, and they're executing it to perfection. And it's allowing everybody to excel in so many ways. And it's great to see, and it's a perfect time to bring your A game each and every night.
Yeah, what's impressed me most is just the way they've played Dominic Ducharme's system. Which, when he came in that tough situation, trying to implement a new system, Brendan Gallagher spoke this week about just how different it was. Like, almost everything changed. And, he tried to implement it on the fly. And there was times they just looked confused, the Canadiens players. Like, they didn't know where to go, what they were supposed to do. It was almost information overload. And they just couldn't figure it out. And that's one of the reasons why they never won more than 3 games in a row during the regular season. And then it just seems like all of a sudden, everything just clicked. And the system that Ducharme tried to explain to us all year about groups of 5 and puck support all over the ice and smart decisions with the puck, we're seeing all of that now. Like, not just one game, but we've seen it now at least 5 games in a row after the 2 overtime games. They've just played the system perfectly. And it's sort of cool to watch, just the way they support the puck all over the place. Players like Joel Armia, just smart decisions with the puck everywhere. And as Rick said, they're frustrating other teams. They're neutralizing in the neutral zone, making it hard to even get into the offensive zone to set up. So that's what's impressed me is the way they played the system, and also Dominic Ducharme's refusal to give up on his system. It would have been easy probably at one point to say, okay, this isn't working, like, let's tone it back or whatever. But he was committed to what he wanted to do. He was committed that it was going to work, and now we're seeing it work.
Yeah, and that system has made world beaters out of guys we did not expect to be world beaters. Like that fourth line, which I like to call the pressure line because that's pretty much what they do, of Joel Armia, Eric Stahl, and Corey Perry, have done such a tremendous job throughout this postseason. And it's not even like they're extremely fast guys. They're all older guys, especially when you look at the ages of Eric Stahl and Corey Perry. But they just have a way of just hemming the opposition in their own zone and just cycling and pressuring them and eventually getting chances on net. And Corey Perry is another guy who's been leading the charge of getting these garbage, greasy goals in front. That's another thing that's impressed me about this team the most. The fact that they have committed themselves, especially in the Jets series, more and more to getting more of those goals in front of the net and making life miserable for the opposing goaltender. Perry, Philip Deneau got himself some chances in front of the net in game 4, I want to say. I think he led his team in shots in that game as well. We all know Brendan Gallagher, he likes to make his home in front of the net as well. But I think the Canadiens, the fact that they have obviously, just committed to just getting those quality chances in front of the net, those high danger chances in the slot or just around the goal line, that has been really impressive to see. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to anything else that impresses them.
Well, from my experience, the X's and O's at this stage of the game are important, but the most important part of all of this is the desire and determination of the guys that are on the ice each and every time, that they don't want to be beat by the opposition. And I think, judging by what we're seeing, these guys, Canadian players, are no longer second on the puck, they're first on the puck, and they're playing a really determined, hard game and making it really, really difficult on anybody that's going to play against them to have any success. And like I said before, they're not a fun team to play against, and it's just nice to see that each and every one of the guys in their lineup has elevated their play to contribute in such a really good, positive way.
They're winning puck battles all over the ice, which we didn't see, especially on the power play. That's one of the reasons their power play was so bad. They weren't winning puck battles. It was one and done, and it was out. But it was interesting to hear the guys this week how Ducharme had separate meetings with each of the lines to clearly define the role that he wanted them to play. And bring up Joel Armia. I don't know exactly what Ducharme said to Joel Armia, but it might have been something along the lines of, we're not expecting you to score. We want you to forecheck hard. We want you to use your body. We want you to be physical. You're going to be the speed on that line with the 2 older guys. And guess what happens? He starts scoring when you're not thinking about it. And same when they put Arturi Lehkonen into Jake Evans' spot with Deneau and Gallagher. And all of a sudden, I'm probably the same thing. We don't need you to score. We just need you to forecheck, be hard, get the puck to those guys. And he starts putting the puck in the net. So I think the fact that Ducharme has made it very clear to each line what he wants them to do, it just makes things easier for guys. Just that okay, this is what he wants me to do, and he's rolling all 4 lines, so all 4 lines are into the game, and everything Dominic Ducharme seems to be touching now is working.
And I think a lot of players are now buying in too, because they're only a couple of games away from making it to the Stanley Cup final. It's a position that a lot of guys maybe they would hope that they would be in that position, but I don't know if the players really thought that they would be in the position, especially the way they ended the regular season. And this is their opportunity. I believe it was Corey Perry when he addressed the team, and he said, these kind of opportunities don't come that often, and you really need to take advantage of that. And I think that went a long way with a lot of the players and their ability to elevate their game and play more in the role that they need to.
And you have to really give full marks to their penalty killing group. They've thrown some different combination and guys. Look at Armia, who probably didn't log much time on the penalty killing, but he's a big body and effective is making things happen. And, the list goes on with each one of those guys that goes out as a four-man group on the penalty killing side. It's allowing them opportunities to win each and every game because they've been so good at it. So a lot of positives on that front also.
And not only killing off the penalties, but scoring on the PKL.
To this point, we've discussed all these players who have done well for the Montreal Canadiens. Phil Deneau, Corey Perry, Yoel Armia, guys on defense, the penalty killing, the power play, all these things. You know who we haven't mentioned to this point? Carey Price. And that actually might be the most surprising thing of all with this team. I mean, Carey Price had to do his thing at different points in the playoffs, but especially against the Jets, I don't think he had to sweat all that much. But his numbers in the postseason have looked scintillating. How do you explain the rebound in Carey Price's play from what we saw in the regular season to now?
Well, I think obviously he's healthy. I mean, there was a big question mark about just how he was feeling with his concussion and some of his other injuries that were maybe nagging. But obviously with the time that he had off, he got himself back. And there's a classic example of a guy, and I think the past speaks for itself, that this guy knows what it takes to win in playoffs. His record is excellent, and he's focused, and he is making things obviously happen in a good way. And I find that he's very, very aggressive now on any of the shooters. He's coming out, he's challenging, and I touched on it before. There's some bounces that are happening his way when it goes through a screen and he can't see it, but it hits the knob of his stick and goes out. Those are all good things, and he's just he's on a mission right now, and you don't know. We do know how far this can go with him making those saves and making having some good bounces happen at good time. So all good on that front, and hope it'll continue for him because everybody was concerned about him, but he's getting the job done big time.
Well, there's two Carey Prices now. There's regular season Carey Price and there's playoff Price, and they're two totally different goalies for whatever reason. This isn't just this season. This goes back previous seasons. In the last 3 times now the Canadiens have been in the playoffs, Carey Price has been amazing. He hasn't been that amazing during the regular season. I wonder how much of it is mental. Like, I don't know if he's just bored during the regular season or what it is, but once the playoffs start, man, he picks it up. And, go back to when Marc Bergevin fired Stéphane Waite, and I think I've mentioned it on a previous episode of the show, I think his timing to fire Waite during the middle of a game was intentional, and the reason was to get Carey Price's attention. Like, wake up, man. We just fired your goalie coach, who's also your friend. You need to be a whole lot better than this, or we're not even going to get in the playoffs. And Stéphane Waite mentioned in an interview a couple of days later with Mitch Melnick on TSN 690 Radio, he said that Bergevin basically told him, if Price doesn't start playing well, I'm going to be the next guy to get fired. So Bergevin was trying to save his own job when he did that. And I think his intention, I'm just speculating here, was how am I going to get Carey Price's attention to wake up, and he's got to play better? Well, I could fire the goalie coach. How about if I do it in the middle of a game? That'll really, it might shake him up. And it seems to maybe worked. I mean, I don't know if that's part of the reason, but Carey Price has, become Carey Price again in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he's highly competitive as well, and he's a gamer, and he lives for these high-pressure games, and he's really dialed in and focused. I think it's more the mental side of the game that's really working well for Carey Price. And I think also he knows his window of opportunity is closing. He's going to be 34 years old this summer, and as I mentioned before, these kind of opportunities don't come around all that often. The last time they were in this situation was 2014. We know how that ended for Carey Price. And I think he's ready to carry the team on his back to the Stanley Cup final if he has to, in order to win that Stanley Cup. He said that is his goal. I think that's every NHL player's goal, but that is something he desperately wants, especially he has the individual accolades from around the league, but also his success internationally as well. And just to get that Stanley Cup as part of his resume is a huge factor for him. And I think he knows this year is probably one of his best opportunities.
Yeah, and the Canadiens last year, I mean, they had no business being in the playoffs last year. They only got in because they expanded playoff format for COVID. This year, they were the worst of all the teams to get into the playoffs. They were in a weaker division. That's why they got in. So Carey Price must realize, like, how many more opportunities is he going to have? As well as the Canadiens are playing right now, next season, when they go back to their regular divisions, it's going to be hard for this team to make the playoffs. It's going to be hard for every team in that division to make the playoffs. A lot of good teams. So he must realize that, this might be his last chance at winning the one thing that's missing from his trophy cabinet, and that's a Stanley Cup. So he's definitely, when you watch Carey Price, you can tell, at least I can tell early in the game when he's on, just the way he moves around the crease. He's so confident. As Rick said, he comes out and challenges guys, and he gets back, and he's up and he's down. He's really, and when he's not on his game, he seems almost lackadaisical, like he's slow getting up. He slides out of his crease, but when he's on, and man, has he ever been on in this playoffs.
And I mean, let's face it, to get to the semifinals, they don't know when they're going to get to the semifinals again. And it's tough to get there. And, I remember in '89 against Calgary, and we had a little meeting in the hotel, and we had a number of young guys, and, and I, after winning in '86 and all that fun stuff that went with it, I just said to most of the guys, I said, listen, guys, take full advantage, because you don't know when you're ever going to get here again in your whole career. So this opportunity, you got to grab it, and you got to make it work for you. So save nothing. And I think that right now, with judging by, the personnel with the Montreal Canadiens, they got some guys that are really hungry to get a taste of maybe getting to the Stanley Cup final. And there's no better way to do it than, being at your very best and enjoy the ride, because it might be long before they get a next one.
Yeah, and those veteran guys like Corey Perry aren't playing for money now. Corey Perry's making $750,000. He's made about $48 million in his career. He doesn't need the money. The only reason he's doing it is he wants to win another Stanley Cup. Stahl is a similar situation, although his contract is getting paid more. But and I think Corey Perry, man, you can make a pretty good argument he's the MVP for the Canadiens so far in the playoffs, just for everything he's brought. I mean, Carey Price on the ice, he's been amazing. I don't get that far without Carey Price, but I think the team is really feeding off of Corey Perry, his leadership, and just the way he's playing also. And they must be looking at you as a guy who signed for a minimum contract. Jesperi Kotkaniemi called it an honor to play on the same team as Corey Perry. And as Rick mentioned earlier, I think when Corey Perry got up and spoke before Game 5 against the Leafs, and Eric Stahl did also, and apparently Shea Weber did also, I think a lot of guys listened.
Yeah, if I'm Marc Bergevin in the offseason, I'm doing everything I can to keep Corey Perry. If it's maybe obviously not like a 3-year deal or whatever, but if he's willing to stay for a 1-year cheap contract, maybe doesn't necessarily have to be at the league minimum. Maybe you bump it up a little bit more, $850,000 or something like that. Maybe you do that. Also, something to keep in mind as well, I believe him, Eric Stahl, and Yoel Armia, that entire fourth line, all unrestricted free agents, on top of Philip Deneau as well. So a lot of questions needed to be answered in the offseason for the Montreal Canadiens, specifically with Marc Bergevin, who presumably will likely be able to stay on as GM to kind of deal with those questions. Anyway, to the next question that we have. It's funny. Rick mentioned you never know when you might ever get to the semifinals again. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where we'll use Stanley Cup semifinals ever again, because once the divisions hopefully go back to normal next year, hopefully we can get back to using terms like conference finals. But in this world, the Montreal Canadiens are in the Stanley Cup semifinals, and they'll play the winner of the Vegas Golden Knights series or the Colorado Avalanche. That's something I never thought I'd ever see beyond a Stanley Cup final, but here we are. Both of those teams are really, really, really good. Which team do you think the Canadiens match up better against between the Golden Knights and the Avalanche? And what do you think their chances are of beating either of those teams?
It's hard to say because we haven't really seen that much. The Canadiens haven't played against these teams obviously this year. We've watched them during the playoffs, and they're two amazing hockey teams. I think the Canadiens probably match up maybe a little bit better against Vegas. It'd certainly be interesting to see Max Pacioretty play against his team with a chance to go to the final, and also Marc-Andre Fleury, a Quebec native, playing in goal. So that was a couple of really good storylines right there. Can they beat them? Everybody's looking at, you hear people talking, you watch Colorado and Vegas, it's like a different league, it's a different pace, it's better this, and it's true. I mean, it's much faster, but they haven't played against the Canadiens, and the Canadiens' whole thing, as we spoke earlier, is with the charm system, is clogging up the neutral zone, making it difficult to get in, keeping guys to the outside. They did that against the Leafs, and the Leafs are a talented team. A lot of offense in the regular season. They couldn't break through after they got up 3-1. So maybe the Canadiens, with their system, can slow these guys down and make it a slower game than what we've been seeing with Colorado and Vegas playing against each other. But I think they probably I mean, Colorado's got so much skill. I mean, when they got up 2-0 on Vegas, you figured, okay, this series is over. Vegas has battled back. But I'd like to see the Canadiens play Vegas because it'd be sort of cool seeing Max Pacioretty going up against his former team.
Yeah, I agree, because look, you're looking at Colorado and Vegas, first and second in the league. They're two very strong, very skilled teams that it's going to be difficult for the Montreal Canadiens in this series. But I think that's a great storyline. Having Max Pacioretty face his former team, and what I think is going to be another factor here is the travel. That so far in the playoffs, there hasn't been too much travel for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, if they have to go either to Colorado or to Vegas, it'll be a lot more on them and having to deal with that whole factor. But, you know, Carey Price can definitely be the difference maker. And I believe it was Blake Wheeler from the Jets series saying, you know, it's like a tree, you know, you just have to keep chopping at it, and eventually it'll come down. Well, that tree of Carey Price did not come down. And I think for many players, it could change their mental aspect of their games, that they get so frustrated that Carey Price is stopping every single shot that they're able to fire at them, that could be a difference. So I think, you know, having a hot goaltender like Carey Price, you know, anything is possible, even though it will be very difficult for the Canadiens facing either Vegas or Colorado.
And it would be nice to get some kind of reading if they had an opportunity to play against each other, but that, not being it, so that's part of the scenario this year. But, you know, you look at the Colorado and Vegas, 1 and 2 for goals for in the league and overall standings, both very good hockey clubs. Colorado with a 40% power play percentage, Vegas with a type of game that they come at you and they make your life pretty miserable. But all that being said, look at into the Final Four. Whoever you got to play against, you can make the adjustments. And if you really want it, you get your goaltender. Again, you have your players continue to play that were not playing as well as they were before. Elevate a little bit more. Anything can happen, and whatever team they end up playing, going to be a great series, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Well, just as you mentioned, the travel will be different. Also, playing in front of a full house on the road.
Yeah.
The teams that played in front of fans on the road were 500, I think it was, in Toronto, and the same thing in Winnipeg. Vegas is nuts. I mean, I've been to the game in Vegas. It's an insane scene in there. It's crazy. And the Golden Knights really feed off of that. I mean, that's as loud of a building as I've ever been in the NHL, and as passionate a fan base as I've ever seen. They're wild about hockey in Vegas. Who would have ever thought that, right? Vegas is a huge hockey town. But that's going to be hard, and the Canadiens are going to have a long break if they do end up playing Vegas before Game 1. So they're going to be a little rusty going into that environment. Those first 2 games, if they play the Golden Knights, are going to be really hard. I mean, if the Canadiens can come out with 1 win out of those 2 games, I think that would be huge. But it's not going to be easy playing in that environment.
That's, of course, assuming the Golden Knights win that series.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think Vegas, they said they're officially reopened to 100%, like everything before the pandemic, no more masks.
Oh, boy.
So it will definitely be wild in Vegas if that's the matchup the Habs will have.
And it's a huge change, like you said, going into Vegas. I mean, they could make conversations on the bench and have no problem conversing. But now even Bednar's saying he can't even, get the calls out there to the bench because there's too much noise. They can't hear them. So it's it's going to be quite different for those guys going into that environment. But anyways, like I said before, it's all about how bad you really want it, and pay the price to do what you got to do to win.
Yeah,
I just want to answer that. Oh, go ahead.
The pregame show they put on in Vegas is amazing. Like the way they get fans,
I bet,
and the players fired up. I mean, the game I was at, it was last season. The intermission acts were the Blue Man Group and Cirque du Soleil. So it's like going to a Vegas show, and the hockey game is just part of the show, and the fans eat it up, and the players really thrive off of it.
I just want to say that at this point in this series, I would think the Canadiens might be better off playing Vegas and not necessarily Colorado. But hear me out here for a second. If Colorado, at this point, we don't know we know Vegas has the advantage right now in the series. Colorado essentially has to win game 6 and force a game 7, and then win that game 7 to win that series. If Colorado finds a way to beat the Vegas Golden Knights, who, as Rick mentioned, have a way of coming at you and making your life miserable, and have a top line, or at least their top defensive players, at least shutting down that top line, doesn't that sound a little familiar to anybody here? They sound like a way better version of the Montreal Canadiens. If the Colorado Avalanche find a way to beat that, who's to say they don't find a way to take what they've learned from that series to beat the Montreal Canadiens? At this point, might as well have the Montreal Canadiens go up against the Vegas Golden Knights. At least they know what's coming. It's just a slightly better version of themselves. Also, if it is Montreal and Vegas, I'm going to quote one of my good buddies, Tristan Damole, from the podcast, We Do This Run podcast. The Canadiens need to find a way to repatriate Celine Dion, who we all know is doing her thing out in Vegas, because there's no way you should let the Vegas Golden Knights have her out at games doing the anthem. Montreal should have Celine Dion doing an anthem at least once at some point in a Montreal-Vegas series, if it gets there. If it gets there. Is that it? I think that's it for everyone this week. I think that's it for this week's edition of Hockey Inside Out. That was fun, just as fun as Carey Price going through a playoff series, it seems. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to get it to 10,000 subscribers. We are considering that as our version of the Stanley Cup this year. So do that, and visit hockeyinsideout.com to check out our full episode. And leave us a comment if you have any questions that you'd like to see us answer in another episode.